To order, thanking all for being here. As a part of our agenda, the Metropolitan Council has begun to read the Dakota Land, Water, and People Acknowledgment, and I will do so now. The Minnesota Council acknowledges that the Metropolitan Council acknowledges that the land we currently call Minnesota, and specifically the 7-county region, is the ancestral homeland of the Dakota Oyate, who are present and active contributors to our thriving region. As a part of the Metropolitan Council's commitment to address the unresolved legacy of genocide, dispossession, and settler colonialism, and the fact that government institutions, including the Metropolitan Council, benefited economically, politically, and institutionally after the forcible removal of the Dakota Oyate. The Metropolitan Council is dedicated to instilling land, water, and people commitments in regional policy. These commitments support the Dakota Oyate, the 11 federally recognized tribes in Minnesota, Ho-Chunk Nation, and the American Indian communities representing over 150 diverse tribal nations that call the 7-county region home. Thank you. We'll call the meeting to order. We have had the Dakota Land, Water, and People Acknowledgement, and now we're looking to the agenda. Is there motion to approve the agenda for today?
Move approval. Second.
Thank you. Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion on the agenda? And if not, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
And opposed, no. Thank you. The minutes of May 5th, 2025 are also here for your approval. And we do take a motion on minutes, right? So is there a motion? Thank you. And a second? Okay.
I'll arm wrestle you for
I'm sorry. We should recognize that it was moved by Representative Lee, seconded by
Wolf.
Wolf. Thank you. Is there any discussion? All in favor, please say yes or aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Thank you. And so our minutes are also approved. We have an agenda today that consists of 2 important information items. The first is our 2026 preliminary community development operating budget. And while we are preparing for that, I'll just state that the second item on the agenda is our housing choice vouchers, residential preferences study, survey results, and next steps. So we'll hear first from the team that is here to present on our budget. And Heather Giesel is here. Thank you. I guess, Heather, you're the big team today.
Yes, I am my
Good
own
deal.
team. Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Madam Chair, committee members, I'm Heather Giesel. I'm the Director of Finance and Administration for Community Development and Metropolitan Transportation Services. So today we'll highlight a little bit of what the programs have done over the past year and give a preview to some of the coming attractions in 2026. So it'll follow the same pattern that you've seen over the last few years. I did scale it back slightly since I know most of you have served on this committee for a few years now and have seen the presentation. So we'll talk a little bit about what's happened over the last year, but I know that my colleagues have been in front of you a lot over the last year, sharing their progress towards implementation and plans for Imagine 2050. But if there's any additional information that you want, or if you'd like it presented differently, please let me know. And again, I can also follow up if there's anything we've missed, or if you want more context or information on anything covered in the presentation. So I'll give a little background on how the budget was built, an overview of the economic conditions that our region is facing and that our programs are operating within, work that we've done to advance Imagine 2050, discuss sources and uses. Those will be traditional pie charts on how we're spending the money, and then giving a preview of upcoming targeted conversations that are related to the budget. So many of you have seen this chart before. So we're early in the process here in Q2. So discussing our preliminary operating budget, a little bit of the performance and connection to Imagine 2050, and then there'll be some targeted conversations throughout the year, as well as the capital program. I'll come back next quarter and talk about that. and then any changes as well as the public comment draft is finalized later in the year. So objectives, our primary focus of our work, and therefore the budget we build, is to support Imagine 2050, more specifically the Housing Policy Plan and the Regional Parks Policy Plan. Also financial stewardship, so paying a lot of attention to our financial stewardship, not only looking at an annual budget, but we're looking at multi-year budgets and making sure that we're structured over time in all of our programs. So framing is the list of items that you've helped develop over the course of your time here. Framing the issues is what our regional role is, providing data analysis and research, specifically providing desegregated data when we can, taking a look at our equity impacts, taking a look at general economic conditions, identifying where we can leverage other state or federal funds, and then figuring out how and where we can make timely financial impacts. And then finally, supporting council initiatives, things like the Climate Action Work Plan, Met Culture, and other equity initiatives. So looking ahead, we worked with program units to develop this preliminary budget about 6 to 8 weeks ago. Some of it is landed, but some of it was, but because it was done earlier in the year, there are things that are in this preliminary budget that will change. I'll highlight some of those later on in the presentation. So taking a close look at financial forecasting for 2026 and beyond, what the legislative outcomes will be, whether or not that's today or in the coming weeks. Especially in parks, that'll have some impact. Closely watching federal budgets because that has a really significant impact on our Metro HRA program. Continuing the work on supporting council strategic initiatives as those develop. And then division work plans that we've helped develop over the handful of years. So we'll start working on those later this year. So moving on to economic conditions. So this is really high-level economic conditions. Our research department helped in putting together this excellent information. So I'm basically leveraging point for point what they've provided. There are some additional resources in the slide deck, but if anyone's interested, I'm able to provide a summary if that's something that you're interested in looking at, or I can connect you with the folks from the research department. So moving on to the next slide. So unemployment rates have fallen steadily as the economy recovered from the pandemic. December 2024 unemployment rate was 2.4%, the lowest in the nation. Economic expansion has flattened in response to perceptions of high operating costs, excessive regulation, perceived excessive regulation, and limited workforce supply growth. The Minneapolis-St. Paul metro area employment at the end of 2024 was plus 0.91% above 2019 employment levels, which was the third slowest metro recovery from the pandemic and recession. And then in 2024, median sale price of a single-family house in the region was $413,000. That's up 3.3% from the previous year. Apartment rents have been substantially tamed by new supply and historically high vacancy rates as new apartment buildings open. Average rent was $1,524 in Q4 of 2024, which was up 1.2% from the prior year. New housing construction in the 7-county region is now decelerating as well. There were only 12,300 units permitted in 2024 after multiple years of production at rates in the low 20,000s from 2019 to 2022. And this is just the data and sources that were cited. So if there's any, feel free to click through here and read additional information, or if you, like I mentioned earlier, if there's the summary page that you're interested in, I can forward that on or connect you with folks from research. So moving on to let's transition a little bit into talking about the budget initiatives that were accomplished in 2024 and primarily 2025. How did they materialize in advancing Thrive, MSP 2040, and Imagine 2050? So first, to highlight on equity, we adopted the Housing Choice Voucher waiting list preference for people who identify as American Indian, engaged with residents of the region through art and policy, and learned about community priorities for climate change actions through engagement with 9 community-based organizations. And then just a quick highlight of some of the initiatives that were carried out by the different program areas. HRA this year will celebrate 50 years of providing rent assistance to low-income families. They also achieved 100% utilization of housing vouchers and expended 97% of federal funds in 2024. Livable communities, they had the 2050 Housing Policy Plan completed, and the LCA grant program report completed last fall with an update underway this year. Parks is working on the Modernizing Regional Parks and Trails Mapping, a GIS improvement project, which is an effort that seeks to modernize and improve the geographic data associated with park and trail long-range plans. And then local planning assistance, adoption of the Imagine 2050 land use policy in February of this year, and initiating a shift from policy development to plan implementation. Research released updated greenhouse gas inventory and strategy planning tool funded by the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant. So moving on to 2026, what are folks going to be working on here in community development? So LCA will be focusing on moving the Imagine 2050 housing policy plan into the implementation phase with a deeper focus on regional housing policy with the Pro Housing Grant, and then partnerships and increased staff capacity. They will also implement an updated approach to the LCA grant programs, and increased focus on internal and external systems collaboration. Local planning assistance, 2026 initiatives are issuing of system statements, an update to the local planning handbook, the Planet program, and the comprehensive planning guidance that they provide to communities throughout the region. You'll also start hearing about, I think you heard at the last committee meeting about the LPA grants project or program. So that's a every 10-year initiative. We're anticipating it'll be between $3.5 and $4 million total. It's a transfer from the general fund. We had $750,000 in the budget in 2025. There will be another $750,000 in 2026, and then additional transfers taking place in 27, 28, and 29 to align with anticipated expenses. There will also be updates to the eligibility criteria for the planning assistance grant program alongside development of a new small communities planning program. Metro HRA initiatives. There is the Bring It Home statewide rent assistance program. And then we will be, as I mentioned earlier, monitoring budget changes at the federal level to determine what impacts they may have in current years and beyond. And then in regional parks, the 2026 Regional Parks and Trails Visitor Study will be implemented. The results of this study provide keen insights into visitor use. Additionally, this information, the data informs the park's funding program distribution and ongoing implementation of the Imagine 2050 plan. For more information there, you'd see Section 9 of the Parks and Policy, or the Parks and Trails Policy Plan. And then in research, qualitative research with community organizations to help local communities understand how their built environments can remove barriers to healthy and safe communities for elders, youth, and children. Regional data development, so land use inventory, population estimates, park use estimates, and parks visitor studies and development trends. So just a couple of highlights for 2026 new initiatives. As I mentioned, we have the Parks Visitor Study. That's a $1 million project in the budget, $475,000 for the Climate Action Work Plan implementation, $50,000 from the project work related to the EPA grant, so Comprehensive Climate Action Plan. That's the fourth year of that project. Federally funded HRA work, a new grants management system, which I am particularly excited about. I know a number of folks are as well in CD. And then we have one new FTE planned parks planner. So an overview, so we're currently just over $11.5 million above the adopted 2025 budget. As a reminder, the adopted budget does not include any of the carry forward items that were in the carry forward amendment. or some of the strategic initiatives that have come into our budget. So it's from December 2024 to now. And then, so HRA is up 6% or $6 million. That's the HRA pass-through. HRA administration is up 5% or $725,000. The community development side, which is everything that's not HRA, program units are up 11% or $2.3 million. Which is a function of two things, the salary increases and then the pro-housing grant, which is a pass-through. Regional administration costs are allocated to us through regional administration. We currently have those programmed at kind of the standard inflation rate of 3.15%. We anticipate those will increase, but we don't have final numbers yet from RA. The Parks Pass-Through Program, that could vary as well, pending decisions coming out of this session, but not anticipating too much movement, and we have built in some inflation factor already. Livable Communities is up 1%, so these revenue budgets are set to state statutes. The expense budgets are the current state statutes plus planned payments from prior year awards. This is based on a cash flow analysis that was completed in March of this year, but we will need to follow up after the 2025 spring and fall grant rounds for a potential public comment update. Since they're multi-year grants, we build the budget to meet the annual cash flow. And then debt service is also down a bit as well. So some potential changes, I've kind of touched on some of these already. Still early in the process, but I'm mostly flagging for things that will most likely change or could change between now and the public comment version. But I and others will be back for some additional conversations. So HRA is still operating under a continuing resolution since Congress hasn't passed a budget. So we're also awaiting final documentation of our funding for 2025, which will also help inform 2026. So just kind of generally keeping an eye on budget and policy changes at the federal level to see what, if any, impact they have on HRA. The Livable Communities Pass-Through Program will come before you like we have, I come before you like I have in the past years with our base revenue. If there is additional revenue that you wanted to invest, either through strategic initiatives or another interest earnings, things like that, or other relinquishments that you could reprogram. And then the Parks Pass-Through Program could also, as I mentioned, change based on session outcomes and then other specific project changes. So next steps will be to monitor state and federal legislative processes, project refinement, stakeholder conversations, adjustments to the 2025 budget as well. So moving on to revenue sources for the 2026 budget. So as you can see, $191.6 million. Of that, $117.3 million is federal, primarily HUD pass-through funds for housing assistance payments. That's just shy of $105 million. Admin fees for HRA, $9.3 million, and then $3.3 million is a combination of both the HUD pro-housing and that EPA grant that I had mentioned. Property taxes, $41.7 million. Of that, $19.9 million is the general purposes levy for CD and HRA. $20.5 million is the LCA programs, the pass-through programs, and then the last $1.3 million is parks debt service. Reserves are at $16.5 million. Most of this is Livable Communities past levy, so that sits in our reserve account. So what you're seeing here is that the funds have already been levied for Livable Communities, and it's just a function of cash flow. So like I mentioned earlier, that those are multi-year grants. We hold them in our reserves, and then as the payments hit or are requested, we pay those out. State funding, $12.1 million. The majority of that, $11.9 million, is parks pass-through. And then there's a small portion, about $128 million, that is the Housing Trust Fund. Then we have $3.1 million from the Family Affordable Housing Program, so that's council-owned rental income. And then the last $1 million categorized as other is just some miscellaneous HRA and FOP revenue, investment earnings, fund transfers as well. So moving on to expenses. So proportionally, this should be similar to what I've shared in prior years. The Metro HRA being the biggest consumer of dollars, and that is administration or the staff that run the program, and then the actual pass-through vouchers themselves. Livable communities, that's staff costs and the pass-through program. The park's annual pass-through program, $16.3 million. As I mentioned earlier, $11.9 million of that is parks O&M funding. The rest is staff and consulting work. And then we have the RA allocation, which is coming in at 4.7%. I had already mentioned previously that we have done an inflation factor of 3.15%. I'm almost positive that that will be higher, but TBD on what exactly that figure looks like, but we're waiting to hear on final numbers from HRA, or not HRA, RA. And then there's the other category, so that is our research program, mainly staff time, some modest dollars to bring in consultants with outside expertise to do some work. Local planning assistance is at $4.3 million. This looks higher than prior years because we do have that $1.6 million approximately sitting in there in preparation for the planning grants. So 2.7 of that is staff time, which is pretty consistent with where we've been in prior years, but we have that additional funding as we're building towards the grant program in 2026. And then division management of about $3.6 million. This is central services, and then one-time consulting budgets. And then uses by category. Pass-through is the biggest component. So this is money going out into our communities, voucher payments to provide private landlords through the Metro HRA program, parks implementing agencies, and then the awards that go to the cities throughout the region for the LCA programs. Salaries and benefits, the RA allocation, $1.2 million of debt service, and then general administrative costs. Some coming attractions, so the grant programs will be back, so I'll have folks from both my department and LCA and LPA to talk about the upcoming grant programs and different grant initiatives. Implementing Imagine 2050, so what local planning assistance will be doing, as well as some of the other program areas. We'll be here to talk about what that looks like throughout 2025 and 2026. And then finally, Metro HRA will be in front of you as well to do the small area fair market rent analysis, public housing agency public housing agency plan and administrative plan, the Bring It Home statewide rent assistance program, and then the any property disposition and purchases that may happen in the coming months and years. And that concludes my presentation.
Oh, you did an incredible job of packaging for this presentation.
I tried to make it a little shorter this year and consolidate.
It was chock full, and really, really appreciate your sharing with us all of this framing for our future discussions. We know that as you know more, you bring more forward, and we'll be able to learn more as well. But this was really a good set of information to prepare us for those discussions. I'm going to look to committee members for questions. Councilmember Chambliss, thank you.
Thank you for that presentation, Heather. I'm curious about the targeted topics, and as we get more information about what's going to happen at the state level and the federal level, it'll be also interesting to see how we focus with our targeted topics and programs. And kind of along those lines, I would be interested in hearing how much of an impact the Metropolitan Council has in some of these areas where there might be a gap in terms of meeting the needs statewide or regionally. So if there's an opportunity to get some of those numbers to give perspective on how much of an impact or how much of an importance our support is, that would be, I think, useful. I did notice that the unemployment rate listed from the research is pretty low, which is good news. And I did a little Google, and I see that some of the BIPOC unemployment rates or Black unemployment rate is also very low. So having that perspective over time, I think, will be very useful in terms of the impact, and also, something very positive to note.
Thank you. Your notes are noted. I really appreciate it. I also wanted to just check in to find out if there were any, if there's any response, Ms. Giesel, regarding targeted areas of work that you can anticipate beyond what has been shared here.
Yeah, Madam Chair, Council Member, I don't have any specifics, but I can certainly share that back with our group and see who would be most appropriate to share that information. But also, if you have more specific questions or like specific data that you'd like to know, that would be helpful also for me to communicate back.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And also gaps, of course.
Yep.
Thank you. So we'll ask for those direct questions to be presented. I know that, as you've noted, as Councilmember Chambliss noticed, the unemployment rates are low, and then there are also some economic factors that our recovery, housing recovery, things of that sort, are impacting as well for us on the overall financial perspective. And so we'll have some questions that we'll have the opportunity to tee up and hear responses back. Thank you. Councilmember Lee?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, Heather. My question is regarding page 12, where under the 24, 25 highlights in the second bullet under HRA, we've expended 97% of federal funds. What happens to the remaining 3%? Does that go back to the feds? Or does that roll over to the next budget year?
Madam Chair, committee members, I'm going to defer to Terry, who is in the audience.
Thank you for being at the ready.
Hello, Madam Chair. Councilmember Lee, it rolls over to the next year.
Okay.
So if we have leftover subsidy funds, it rolls to the next year for expenditure.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from council members? I also did want to ask regarding the reserves. You had noted that the reserves are multi-year grants that go in and are expended as they come due. Is there any portion, and maybe I missed this, but of the reserves that is purely reserved that we carry over? And, I know we have a general reserve policy for Metropolitan Council. Is there any specific policy for community development?
Want me to answer, or do you want to lead?
Go ahead.
Madam Chair, committee members, so there are reserves in both HRA and livable communities. CD, as a general practice, does not have a reserve fund, as like the other departments sometimes do, because we are funded by the general fund. So we are paid sort of on actual expenses rather than collecting funds and then having excess sit in a reserve fund. So yes and no, but as a general point, CD does not have a reserve fund that is built upon, because we are just pulling from the council's broader general fund.
All right. Thank you very much. I guess that makes sense.
Yep.
Are there any other questions from council members? We really appreciate it. And again, as I've said, this is excellent framing for us for upcoming discussions. We note the calendar that shows us the plan for bringing this information forward. And we really appreciate your being here and look forward to those additional opportunities we'll have.
Great.
Did you have anything to add? Okay. And next then on our agenda, we have the opportunity to hear regarding our housing choice vouchers residential preference study, survey results and next steps, and we have a team here. Okay, so I understand we have Matt Schroeder, Darcy Vandegrift, and Zhu Gong. Thank you. And a presentation ready for us as well.
Good afternoon, council members. My name is Darcy Vandegrift, and together with my colleagues Matt Schroeder and Ju Gong, we work in the Community Development Research section. So this afternoon, we are here to provide a research update for the survey results for a long-term study that we're doing for the Housing Choice Voucher Residential Preferences Study. And before we move to the next slide, I just want to give you a little bit of background and this is familiar to probably everyone here, but for those who are listening online, the Housing Choice Voucher Residential Preferences Study details experiences of housing preferences of Housing Choice Voucher recipients, which we'll refer to in the slide deck as HCV recipients. And as you know, the program is a federally funded rent assistance program in which eligible households find a unit on the open rental market while renting from a private landlord. And this program partners with private rental market landlords to provide affordable housing opportunities for households across the region. Participants pay a minimum of 30% of their income towards rent, and then Met Council's Housing Redevelopment Authority, Metro HRA, pays the remaining amount. And as Heather noted in her slide, Metro HRA serves about 7,300 residents or vouchers in the region. There's more people in those households, and that make in nearly 100 communities. So Anoka County, Carver, and most of the suburban Hennepin and Ramsey counties are served by the voucher program, which makes us the largest administrator of vouchers in the state. And this study is a collaboration between Metro HRA, CD Research, and also the Minneapolis Public Housing Authority, MPHA, and they serve about 7,000 voucher holders. And together, Metro HRA and MPHA, the Minneapolis program, serve nearly 60% of all extremely low-income households in the Twin Cities region. And the inclusion of two agencies in the study, ours and the collaboration with Minneapolis, allows us to develop a broader understanding, looking at a wider array of housing circumstances and also a more comprehensive inclusion of housing choice voucher holders. And the information item is going to just talk about the first part of the study, sharing survey results from the completed phase 1 of the study. So the study has been going on for a minute now, and in September 2023, Metro HRA Director Terry Smith and also my colleague, researcher Ju Gong, presented the introduction and background of the study to the CDC. And I'm just going to review this a little bit here so we can all kind of refresh our memories. So the objectives of the study, we've organized here into 3 areas, and you will see these areas again when we go back to the survey results. So one objective was to develop understanding of preferences and priorities of housing choice voucher recipients. So we want to understand individual households' preferences and also trade-offs that people make in meeting these preferences. We also wanted to understand differences in preferences by social characteristics, including race and ethnicity and geography, and et cetera, and we'll talk about that a little bit in a moment. We're also interested in the process of how to meet these preferences, and so we wanted to see what combination of individual preferences along with barriers and the effects of the program parameters shaped the meeting of these preferences. What were these effects? And we wanted to know what kinds of programs will help voucher holders to satisfy their residential preferences. Finally, we've looked at what these preferences are, what the program experiences with programs are, and the kind of effects of barriers and program parameters. So after the searches are completed, we wanted to look at satisfaction. How satisfied are voucher recipients in meeting the outcomes of finding these preferences, both in terms of their neighborhood and their home unit preferences, and again, how those outcomes vary by social characteristics. So before we move to those key details of the survey findings, I want to present one slide where we step way back to make an overview of sort of what are some guiding ideas that help us understand these data. And then on the next slide, I'll go way granular to look at some of the survey methodology. So let's step back for a minute. And we want to share with you that the council research is shifting to a person-centered view of opportunity in light of our research findings. And so it's helpful to know why we started looking into this. Our programs presumably want to improve the lives of lower income people, as do many programs and many other programs. And over the past few decades, as you probably know, one big way of doing this is by incentivizing voucher holder moves to so-called better or higher opportunity neighborhoods. And that really raises an important question. How do you define neighborhood quality and opportunity? And we could speak broadly of two, what we're calling here, views or approaches. One of them, which you see on the left, is what we would call a place-centered view. And really the guiding question here is, what places offer opportunities to voucher holders? And often a place-centered view will distill opportunity to a single kind of one-size-fits-all number that is based in quantitative analysis. So specifically, some places are then called higher in opportunity than others. And there's a lot of different indices, but these quantitative measures tend to be heavily influenced by the socioeconomic makeup of neighborhoods. So neighborhoods that are defined as higher opportunity tend to be higher income. So in contrast, some of the work that community development research has done over the past decade leads us to think in a different way, we would say a more nuanced way that we would call a person-centered view. And here, instead of focusing on place, we're asking the question, what kind of opportunities do voucher holders themselves value? So there's some differences from a place-centered view. First, opportunity in this model or in this approach is multidimensional, and different places have different kinds of opportunities. So for example, suburban neighborhoods tend to have lower crime rates and less exposure to environmental hazards, but urban neighborhoods are closer to jobs and high-frequency public transportation, to just give a few examples. Another important aspect of this person-centered view is that different people define opportunity differently. Different voucher holders we found in our research prioritize different things, including the kinds of housing units and buildings they live in. And as well as we've heard from Metro HRA staff that many voucher holders who move into these higher opportunity neighborhoods actually move out of them again, whether because their families face discrimination in neighborhoods or schools, or they want to live closer to families and their family or other important social ties. So the point of all of this, before we move to the survey analysis, is that when we're trying to design a policy that improves the lives of lower income people, we can't simply assume that everyone wants to live in a higher income neighborhood, let alone that everyone wants the same thing when they're searching for housing. And so a people-centered approach will prioritize the perspective of voucher holders themselves, and we need to understand what it is that they value when searching for housing. So I told you I would now like to spend a moment to talk about survey methodology. So we partnered with a consultant to administer this survey, and it was designed to include key groups for accurate results. So our sample included 1,500 voucher holders from Metro HRA and Minneapolis, and it was designed to be a representative sample by agency, household size, and race ethnicity. When we administered the survey, respondents had the opportunity to do online and paper options. They also had an option to take the survey in other languages besides English. And responses were gathered between March and May of 2024. We had 454 responses. That's a 30.3% response rate. When we moved to the data analysis, the consultant de-identified all of the respondents to preserve privacy, and we did an analysis of both the closed-ended questions and also open-ended questions that respondents had an opportunity to work with. So before I turn it over to my colleagues, I'll just share with you the research questions guiding the survey, and these should look familiar to the objectives that we saw earlier on the slide. So again, the first area that we're going to talk about are preferences and priorities. What is it that voucher holders want, and what is it that they prioritize from among those preferences? The second question is, how do we meet those preferences? So are voucher holders getting what they want? Are they having those preferences met? And then what would help voucher holders in our programs to get what they want? And then finally, after the search occurred, voucher holders come to their search with a number of preferences and priorities. They work with the program to try to meet those, and so satisfaction is the end result of that, right? How satisfied are voucher holders with their neighborhood, and how satisfied are they with their home unit? So with that background completed, I'm going to turn it over to my colleagues.
Thanks, Darcy, and thanks, council members. So as Darcy just mentioned, there is an assumption out there, sometimes explicit, sometimes more implicit, that everyone really wants to live in a certain kind of neighborhood, but not everyone can because they don't have the resources or the information or the time to search there. So we, though, have been really wanting to find out more specifically, when you ask voucher holders themselves, what kinds of environments do they want? And so what we did in the survey was we asked them about 29 different characteristics of homes and neighborhoods, and asked them to rate them on a scale of that ranges from extremely unimportant to extremely important. And so on this slide, you can see the share of voucher holders. You can see each of the 29 characteristics, but for each of them, we've grouped them by the share of voucher holders who rated them as very important or extremely important, which I'll just shorten to important. So on the left side, these are the neighborhood characteristics. And by the way, you'll see the same icons throughout the presentation, with the green being the neighborhood, the blue being the home characteristics. But the most important neighborhood characteristics there were safety from crime, amenities like grocery stores and medical services, as well as schools that are welcoming to them and their kids, and where they'll get a good education, neighbors who are accepting of their cultural background and things like that. At the bottom, though, is high-income neighborhood. This was by far the least important characteristic as rated by voucher holders, which isn't to say that income is unimportant, but voucher holders, want things that are sometimes associated with high-income neighborhoods, but the income level itself appears not to be that important to them. On the right side, you can see home characteristics. So leading the way there is rent that's affordable, number of bedrooms, home and appliances in good repair, living space, respect from the property management and landlord. So trying to ask about a broad variety of things that we'd read about in previous literature and heard about from housing authority staff that would be important. So you can see here that almost all of these were rated as important by at least half of voucher holders, which makes sense. If you're given this list and you just think like, well, yeah, everything sounds pretty great. Kind of like a buffet at a restaurant. You'll go through the list and say, I'll take safety from crime and welcoming schools, and ooh, living space looks good. And before you know it, your plate is full. Unfortunately, housing searches are more like ordering from a menu in a restaurant. You can't get everything you want, and you have to pick what's most appealing. And so toward that end, we also asked them to choose their top 3 characteristics. So if they had to choose the top 3 that were most important to them, what would they be? And here is what they said. They said 42% chose affordable rent in the top 3, 34% safety from crime, and then rounding out those most commonly chosen ones is number of bedrooms, good repair, and living space. So one of the things that is important to note here is that 4 of these 5 characteristics are characteristics of housing units. Only safety from crime is really more of a neighborhood characteristic. And so we've kind of noticed this predominance of a housing unit focus when that come out in the survey answers. And I want to emphasize this is not necessarily inherent to all low-income households. This is informed by their living experiences and their histories. But it was important to bring this out, to emphasize that it's not just neighborhoods that people are interested in. We also wanted to highlight the diversity of preferences and importance of things people felt were important among voucher holders. So this zooms out to show all of those characteristics that we asked about. So those leftmost columns are the same numbers that appeared in the previous chart, but here we can see the rest of them too. And again, with those home characteristics in blue, you can see that, by and large, those are relatively more important, even when people are picking their top 3 characteristics. So laundry machines, home security, building type, like single-family detached home, for example, those were commonly chosen too. The other thing here is that, I mentioned that we need to recognize that not all voucher holders want the same thing, and that is kind of really evident from the long tail of this chart, that although, most of these were chosen by less than 10% of voucher holders, most of them were chosen, actually all of them were chosen by at least one voucher holder. So again, important to recognize that not everyone wants the same thing. But we also, as Darcy mentioned, asked some open-ended questions, and Ju will fill you in on those right now.
Matt presented an analysis on the characteristics of a home or neighborhood that voucher holders desired, and I will present quotes from the open-ended portion of the survey about voucher holder priorities and preferences. Qualitative quotes allow us to humanize data and remind us that these are not just survey results, they are real humans with lived experiences. The open-ended survey questions and qualitative research supports our efforts towards a person-centered view in our work. These quotes demonstrate that each voucher holder often has multiple preferences, but must make choices around which preferences are their highest priorities. Each quote has a corresponding housing unit or neighborhood icon to demonstrate if their preference were a housing unit or neighborhood preference. I worry that uncontrolled rising rent amounts will force me to move or be unable to find affordable housing elsewhere. So this respondent shares that affordability and cost are their priority. Location, location, location. This is central to everything important to me. Work, child needs, groceries, shoppings, and retail, and highways. So this voucher holder values proximity to desired locations such as their child's needs, their work, and retail. Everything is close by, like the mosque and grocery store. I'm able to socialize. I'm not isolated. The transportation is great. Similar to the second respondent, this third respondent also identifies location as a priority. However, the voucher holder prioritizes different amenities, such as social connections and places of worship, as well as transit accessibility. These open-ended responses tell us that while there may be similarities in preferences, priorities among voucher holders are not a one-size-fits-all. Different households value and prioritize different characteristics. And now I'll turn it back over to Matt to talk about how we can meet voucher holder preferences.
Thank you, Ju. We know from a lot of literature that it is very hard for voucher holders to find housing at all within the time limits that they have to use their voucher, and also that fits within the voucher amount. And so we really wanted to ask, given the constraints there, how likely are they to be able to get what they want with those preferences? And so to do this, some people do this by just looking at quantitative data on a map and say, well, you live in a low crime area, so therefore you must feel safe from crime. We, in contrast, wanted to ask them and hear from them directly, do you feel safe from crime? And so for each of those characteristics, again, that is what we did. And for those, here are those those most commonly selected characteristics in the top three. And here's the share of voucher holders who said that they felt like they had this for themselves. Affordable rent, 85%, and good repair at 78% were relatively more attainable, I guess you might say, by voucher holders. Safety from crime, the number of bedrooms and living space, at least 70% or more, 30% or more of voucher holders said that they did not feel like they had those. And so even though this is a majority of voucher holders saying that they feel like they got what they wanted with respect to these specific characteristics, I don't want to leave you with the impression that we can't do better, because obviously we can. It is one thing to know, and it's great to know for each of those characteristics, whether people said that they feel like they have them, but most people probably aren't evaluating the success of their housing search by going down the list of what they were looking for and seeing what they can check off. And so we also asked them, in your most recent search, did you find some, most, or all of what you were looking for, or nothing? And if so, how difficult was it? And in this chart, you can see how that breaks down. The gray shade shows that a relatively small proportion of voucher holders said that they didn't find anything that they were looking for. And those purple shades together show that 80% of households found at least something they were looking for in a neighborhood, and then 86% found something at least that they were looking for in a home. But then those darker purple shades show the share of those voucher holders that said it was easy to find what they were looking for. And you'll notice that's pretty small. So only 22% of voucher holders who said that they found something said that it was easy for neighborhoods, and the comparable share for housing units is 16%. We had, as I said, we know we have a long list of things from previous research that we know voucher holders face. We had a list of things from housing authority staff as well that they know of. And so we wanted to know more about what kind of barriers did people face? How common were they? And conversely, what would help address those? And so they basically fell into three main buckets. One was cost. It is expensive to look for housing in addition to paying for housing in the first place. Application fees, fees for background checks and security deposits, those can really, really add up. And so voucher holders said that financial assistance for paying for those would be really useful to them, as would raising the amounts that vouchers would pay for. The second bucket was more in the supply side of things, that there just are not enough property managers out there and landlords who accept vouchers in the first place. And so bringing more managers and landlords into the program, they said, would be very useful. And then finally, the third bucket was information. Given the set of properties that does exist, that does accept vouchers right now, they said that having some referrals or having at least some kind of a head start, some place to start looking for units that accept vouchers would be really useful, as well as understanding the payment standards. That is, I have a unit that rents for $1,500 a month, and electricity and gas are included, water is not, here's my income, what am I gonna pay, and so on. This can be, as I'm sure you all know, a pretty bewildering thing to deal with. And so having some more tools, I guess, to understand what they can afford and how much they will pay would be useful to them too. So we wanted as well to ask finally about the outcome of all this, these housing searches. So voucher holders want certain things. They get some of them, they don't get others. It was probably pretty difficult. But as Darcy mentioned at the beginning, what's really important to us is not that people live in any certain kind of home or any certain kind of neighborhood. We want them to be satisfied with their lives. And so we wanted to ask them that directly. All things considered, how happy are you with your living situation? And the good news there is that about 2/3 of voucher holders said that they were happy with their neighborhood, about 64%, and with their housing unit, 65%, which I should hasten to add means that about 1/3 of voucher holders are less than happy with their living situation. So I do not mean this to minimize the very real concerns that some voucher holders have, but at least, you know, it may seem surprising that 2/3 of them are satisfied, but it is in line with what other researchers have found elsewhere in the country. So Zhu will add some more nuance to these numbers because there is a lot of nuance.
In line with the person-centered view, these quotes add nuance and personalization to the presented statistics about voucher holder satisfaction. The quotes on this slide in the dark blue block boxes are from the open-ended responses that demonstrate higher levels of satisfaction with current living conditions. Voucher holders describes what makes them satisfied about their living situations. For the first time in my entire life, my house feels like I am home. It is a clean environment and safe for my children. This is an awesome apartment. It's got great communal amenities. My unit has a laundry, a dishwasher, and garbage disposal inside. It's spacious and has good weather insulation and an HVAC system. Management is professional. I feel lucky and would like to see everyone with a voucher be able to live in a place like this. Maintenance fixes things quickly. The neighborhood is quiet. We are allowed companion dogs. I have a space in the connected garage and a private balcony that is screened in. I have a dishwasher, which is very good because I'm disabled and cannot stand too long. And my apartment is spacious. We see that residents have a variety of needs that they use to evaluate their satisfaction with their living conditions. This demonstrates the range of needs and preferences in housing searches and living situations, such as having family needs met, housing unit amenities, positive relationships with neighbors, disability accommodations, and the quality of property management practices. On the next slide, we will present quotes that signify dissatisfaction with current living conditions. The two quotes on this slide represent voucher holders who described neutral to high levels of dissatisfaction in their current living situations. The quote in the medium shaded blue box on top represents neutral to somewhat dissatisfied, while the quote in the light blue box on the bottom represents very dissatisfied. The shades of blue in the quotes the quotes are in corresponds with the level of satisfaction. So the darker blue on the previous slide signifies more satisfaction, while the lightest blue signifies dissatisfaction. So the top quote, which is neutral, states, "I was lucky enough to find a house instead of an apartment. I like having privacy, but the home is small and outdated. I don't want to give notice to move and try to find something that accommodates us better just to not be able to find anything." And the respondent on the bottom, which signifies less satisfied or dissatisfied, reads, "Having 3 teenagers and 2 school-aged children makes it hard to live in this house. It is only 3 bedrooms. It feels very cramped." The open-ended results displayed a variety of factors contributing to dissatisfaction with living conditions. The quotes on this slide show a range of factors that contribute to dissatisfaction, such as limited space and outdated amenities and infrastructure. After discussing general satisfaction among voucher holders, I will turn it over to Matt to discuss key differences among voucher holder satisfaction.
Thank you again, Ju. In keeping with one of the themes of the presentation that Darcy mentioned at the beginning, we really want to disaggregate as much as we can, not assume that all voucher holders are the same. And so we did want to break that roughly 2/3 satisfaction amount down by as much as we could. And so we looked at several things. Most of them, we were surprised, did not show statistically meaningful differences in satisfaction. And those include whether households were homeless when they got their voucher, how long they've been in the program for, their race and ethnicity, except for a couple slides from now, and household type, that is, households with kids or older adults or other households, adults living together without kids in the household. But where we did see, we saw 3 key differences. One is that Metro HRA residents are more satisfied with their neighborhood than Minneapolis Public Housing Authority residents are, 71% versus 57%. That is not true for their homes. The 68% for Minneapolis who are satisfied with their homes and 63% for Metro. Those aren't statistically different. The second difference is that Somali respondents expressed way more satisfaction with both their homes and neighborhoods than other households did, so about 90% for each of those. And finally, respondents who were issued vouchers recently in 2023 expressed a lot more satisfaction with their homes, 80% for them versus 63% households that received their voucher before 2023. But the same was not true for neighborhoods. So some intriguing things there. And Darcy, I know, is going to talk about some ways that we're going to dig into this in a bit. But first, I did want to just sum up with a few different observations. One is that voucher holders clearly do want different things. There's no single voucher holder that we can try to serve. But to the extent that we can generalize, they were focused more on housing unit characteristics than neighborhood characteristics, especially affordable rent, having enough space, and having a home and appliances that are in decent condition. Second, voucher holders were generally able to meet their preferences, though it's clear that they could use more help finding places where they feel safe and have enough space for themselves. And they said that knowing about units that accept vouchers, having more units that accept vouchers in the first place, as well as financial assistance, would be really useful to them in that. And finally, voucher holders are generally satisfied, which holds true for most groups, and that while Minneapolis voucher holders do express less satisfaction with their neighborhood than Metro voucher holders do, still a majority of them are at least somewhat happy with their neighborhoods. To tie things up a bit by returning to that contrast that Darcy drew at the beginning between the person-centered framework and the place-centered framework, we just want to note again that living in a high-income neighborhood itself, by itself, is just not that important for most voucher holders. Some of the neighborhood characteristics that they listed may be easier to find in higher income neighborhoods, like green space or safety from crime. But as I mentioned, they also expressed a desire for welcoming neighbors and welcoming schools that might actually be harder to find in higher income places, based on what we've heard from our housing authority staff. And so might homes with lots of space that will actually fit within their voucher amount. So again, the tension there and the trade-offs that they have to make. So yeah, just wanted to be clear that when we're talking about the concept of opportunity, it's really important not just to use the socioeconomic status of neighborhoods as a proxy for every kind of opportunity that might be offered there. And I want to wrap up by saying that this does not at all, I don't at all mean to imply that the mobility programs like our community choice demonstration program that does provide a lot of these services, financial assistance, counseling to, and bringing more landlords into the program in those higher opportunity areas, I don't for a minute mean to imply that those are not important. Clearly, a lot of voucher holders do think that those neighborhoods are best for them, and it's pretty clear that they do need extra support in moving to those places that they want to go to. Yeah, so just wanted to make clear that that we are supporting those voucher holders, and I think the voucher holders also said that access to more of those services, regardless of where they want to live, would also be useful to them. So I will turn it back over to Darcy now.
Thanks, Matt. To conclude, we wanted to share a little bit about where this project is going next. We will, and before I go over the details, I just wanted to, as an overview, we are going to complete the survey and analysis and move into a qualitative portion that will include both interviews and focus groups. The reason for that is that the kind of nuances of lived experience are extremely important to understanding both the preferences and the challenges of having those preferences met. And interviews allow us to see how biography, how lived experience interacts for individuals, but with nuance and depth. And focus groups allow us to see how community values and shared experiences come into play. One piece, for example, that we're really interested in exploring more that we weren't able to look at in the survey is the role of community connections, social ties, and family relationships in the housing choice voucher search process and in the experiences of voucher holders. So we are working to publish the report in Q3, and we'll kick off the first wave of qualitative research in summer and fall of 2025. We want to take some good time with these results and analyze them, and also spend time talking to Metro HRA and Minneapolis staff about the results and the program implications. And we want to come back to you and also hear your thoughts about the results from the second wave of research. We also know that a snapshot in time can be really effective in both survey and qualitative research, but even more powerful is talking to people more than once to see how their experiences change over time. So there will be a longitudinal component of going back and re-interviewing people that we talked to in 2025, again 2 years later. And so that's the planned trajectory as of this time. Thank you for your kind attention, and now we will entertain any questions or comments from you. Thanks.
Well, thank you for the robust presentation. I'm sure that there are questions. I have a few. I'll look to our counselors first. Go ahead, Councilman Chambliss.
Thank you. This is a very interesting survey, and I think it's going to be very valuable. I really appreciate, the interpretation of the results and some of the things that stood out. In terms of, one of the standouts was the preferences by ethnicity and the Somali community. I'm interested if maybe some of the future surveys are going to dig a little bit deeper into the importance of doing, I don't know what you call it, the disaggregated survey, meaning that in terms of representation, and if there are significant ethnic or cultural differences, like what does that mean and how we apply our policy and approach our engagement or our policy solutions, because I think those are things that I have been observing as very important, and making sure that we understand those differences and what that means as far as how we deliver services, how we do our engagement, and how that might change over time. If we don't start tracking it, we won't know that maybe there are some things that change, or within the Somali community, there may be differences as well. So just kind of like digging deeper and getting into those layers would be very interesting, I think, to see. And secondly, in terms of getting a feel for what the respondents are saying in terms of like using the quotes, getting that context, the nuance is really important. I'd also like to see categorizing the feedback or the comments, whether it's through grouping or coding, so I can see overall kind of what the themes are, because the quotes are so strong when they're elevated, and if you only see 3 and there was a survey of 700 or 1,000, then I'd want to know more about the process of selecting the specific quotes. Because everybody's going to interpret that differently, because it's going to bring those three quotes up very strong. But I also like the fact that quotes allow you to get away from kind of watering down some of the key information that was extracted. So maybe utilizing both of those would be helpful for me.
Thank you. I know I observed some of the same. Thank you for bringing that out. Councilmember Chai. Lee.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Once again, great presentation, and these are very thoughtful questions. My first question is, since the number of bedrooms came up as being important, do we track what people desire versus what they ultimately get? So, for example, if someone desired 5 bedrooms but ended up having to settle for a 3-bedroom apartment, and then my second question is, do we track and ask about the types of household in terms of are there multi-generational homes? I remember during the recession in 08, 09, to save money, a lot of folks in different generations continue living in the same home. And so that's the second question. Thank you.
So in terms of what people find in their actual housing search outcome, we might ask Terry to join us at the table, but I wonder if, Matt, if you had any thoughts about sort of if we learned anything in the survey about multi-generational homes and any other things you'd like to comment on about Councilmember Lee's question.
Sure, Madam Chair, Councilmember Lee. Unfortunately, there is no really specific concrete indicator in the administrative data that will allow us to identify multi-generational homes with any certainty. I'll have to go back and look at that to see if there's anything that we might be able to do. But aside from looking at things like household size and a very rough breakdown of household type, it just wasn't something we were able to do, unfortunately.
Madam Chair and council members, I could add maybe a little bit to that. Anecdotally, we certainly know that we are serving multi-generational families. I think talking about bedroom size can be tough because A household might have a 6-bedroom voucher, for example, but we know there are very few 6-bedroom homes in the region, and so their ability to find one may be limited. We do have, voucher holders do have the ability to size up. So if they have, for example, a 2-bedroom voucher, they can rent a 3-bedroom as long as the rent qualifies, which can be tough in this market. If they have a 3-bedroom voucher and they size down to a 2, they can certainly do that, but I think it's largely dependent upon the market. One of the things that we grapple with as staff are the bedroom size allocations. So we adopt what's called subsidy standards that allows for a certain number of bedrooms for certain household compositions. And that's a tough conversation. The larger bedroom size that we give families impacts the number of families we can serve because, of course, it's more expensive to give a family a 4-bedroom voucher than it is a 3-bedroom. So it's something we grapple with and something we can dig in with you at a later date if that would be helpful.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Very interesting information. I am curious, since pretty much everybody has to make trade-offs when they're looking for housing unless they're independently wealthy. Has anybody studied this sort of information on the general population of renters versus just voucher holders? It'd be nice to know if it's different. Satisfaction and whatnot.
Matt, do you have information with you on that? If not, we can definitely get back about that.
Madam Chair, Councilmember Wolf, that is a great question. There's a lot of material on that I think it probably would be better to talk offline about. But I mean, briefly, I think, just based on what research I can remember off the top of my head, people with higher incomes tend to be able to focus more on neighborhood aspects. There's, a whole consumer decision-making model for housing searches out there that, some people dispute because housing isn't really like any other consumer good, but people tend to be purchasing like bundles of like what's the school district like and is it near a park and stuff like that. Whereas, and they also tend to be able to have more time to be able to search too than voucher holders do. So I think the upshot is that low-income housing preferences and specifically low-income renter housing preferences are different. But again, it really just has to do with unique situations and experiences that they've gone through in the past.
And of course, the goal is to make sure that we're able to meet the needs of these people who are needing vouchers because of income and situation. Go ahead, Councilmember Lindstrom.
Thanks. My brain automatically goes to how are we going to act differently now that we have these results? And I know that's something we're going to be looking into for the rest of this year and into 2026 and further survey information, et cetera. Could we go to slide 13?
Is that it? I can't.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right on the money. So on the far right there under information, I was a little surprised to see the list of properties that accept vouchers as something that folks are seeking more of. I would think that either we would provide that information if someone says, I want to live in Roseville within 3 miles of my kid's school, that we would have that information, or housing link, you would be able to input that information. Am I wrong about that? And number one, and then number two, I guess were we surprised about the results, like about the cost for application fees, and in particular the cost for application fees and deposits? Is that something that we would modify based on these results?
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair and Councilmember Lindstrom. We do know that paying application fees and deposits can help families achieve housing faster and be more successful. And we know that because we have some smaller programs that came with some federal funds to assist with that. You all as policy makers also dedicated some specific funds for certain types of vouchers to assist with those things. For example, we know that our success rate for voucher holders that have some supports, such as those types of things, are having 80% placement success of their voucher versus the broader voucher holder that doesn't have any supports or extra assistance from us, the success rate is 62%. So we know it helps, but for example, the downside of that is it's costly. You know, a deposit for is anywhere from $1,000 to $3,000 to $4,000 per family, and so you start adding that up. We don't get any federal funds from that, so it would come out of a special pot. But I think it helps us think more deeply about this. It's important to families, so you know some of the things that will come out of this. Is there something we can do about that? Can we identify some funds for that? A list of properties, we do, the regulations require that we help families identify available units, and we're lucky here in our state that we have Housing Link. So the council is a contributor, annual contributor to Housing Link because we refer all voucher holders there to find units. But it's not always perfect because landlords can pick and choose. And so a landlord or property owner may today accept a voucher and tomorrow they change their mind that they're not going to. So we do know that the efforts at the legislature to adopt non-discrimination laws statewide would be beneficial, but that hasn't happened yet. But it's things like this, like help you understand the payment standard tools. We'll take that, and we know it's complicated. So now we can dig into that further with our resident advisory board or another group to how can we make this more understandable and help it, you know, make it easier for families. So I think there's already ways we can use this information, but even having a deeper dive will help us even more.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. This has been chock full of information, and really do appreciate having this overview. I had some questions just based on some of the things that came up in the slides. On slide 17, I think there was a quote, yeah. No? Yes, slide 17. It's the first quote, and I was surprised that in the quote it said, I don't want to give notice to move, trying to find something that accommodates us better, just not to be able to find anything. And that raises a question for me. Is it necessary to give notice before one looks for a new housing arrangement? Or could I, as a voucher holder, find something, investigate it, and then apply, and then give notice, if you will? What are the considerations that this party is describing? Could someone talk to that? Is it process bound?
Madam Chair, I think there's a couple things that families are toying with. Most, if not all, leases require a notice period for a resident to move. So we'll see 30-day or 60-day notices. Mm-hmm. So the family will have to give the property owner a notice that they want to move. The HRA also needs enough notice to move so that we can do paperwork and determine what rent amount they're eligible for when they move. And we usually don't start that process until they give notice to their landlord and the notice is accepted. And so it puts families in a tough spot if they give notice to their property owner to move and the owner re-rents it and they don't find anything on the market that they like better. They're in a tough spot because then they will still have to move and they don't have anywhere to live. You know, and so I think
that is really tough.
It's really tough. And what we can advise households and families to do is look at the general market, become familiar with the areas you want to live, what types of properties are coming on the market that you might be interested in. And we've recently changed our process to make it easier. We used to always require a 60-day notice for a household that wants to move, and now we'll just As long as the family gives proper notice to their landlord, we'll get their voucher issued as quickly as possible, especially if they're moving at their annual recertification time. We already have all that information that, in terms of the dollar amount that they'll be eligible for, but it's complicated for households, and I don't think there's an easy answer for that.
No, but I do appreciate knowing that you're working to be more flexible and to expedite to the extent possible so that families have a shorter window within which they necessarily have to give notice and be able to move. It is complicated. I'm not sure what the answer is, but I know that is a process area that requires some ongoing work and hopefully improvement for families. I don't know how to solve it, but I certainly sympathize with it. There also, in the beginning, you spoke of the variety of, or the distribution that you were seeking in order to have a full set of information for the survey. And then you did speak of the 30% return. I was wondering if you got the distribution that you were desiring by agency, household size, and race, and how that is reflected in the responses, that 30% responses you received.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Madam Chair. Basically what we did was we split the entire population of voucher holders into 30 groups. There were two agencies, 3 categories of household size, and 5 race groups. And then we took about an 11% sample from each of those groups. As with most surveys, those groups responded at different rates. And so we did get respondents from every group, but what was necessary then I guess the most concrete example is that Metro HRA voucher holders had a higher response rate than Minneapolis voucher holders. So unless we did something, the overall answers would be more reflective of Metro voucher holders than of Minneapolis. And so because we knew the full, what the population distribution looked like, we could I guess assign more influence, you might call, to the Minneapolis voucher holders, and de-emphasize, I guess, the Metro responses, so that we could apply these different weights and make the sample look exactly like the population does. So even though we had different response rates within each of those groups, we were still able to use what we knew about the population and our sample responses to get at good estimates of the voucher holding population as a whole.
Okay, you made it work.
We do. 30% response rate is, I think we're all kind of surprised that it was that high. But yes, as all researchers do, we just make it work.
Thank you very much. And finally, looking at slides 18 to 20 was really, really interesting. A lot of information in that set. And I'm not sure that those are the exact numbers, but it was around there, the data that was shared on Metro HRA being more satisfied with neighborhood, Somali respondents being more satisfied. In general, respondents issuing recent vouchers, all of those responses that followed each other were very, very insightful. But I think, as Councilmember Chambliss already noted, it would be so helpful to know more. What were the elements of satisfaction might be one of the questions, or dissatisfaction in each of these categories. I am looking so forward to, as I know you are, the deeper research that will happen in the interviews and the focus groups in order to be able to get deeper and gain more information. I'm assuming that you will be able to dig into some of those areas so that we have more information about the elements. I know they were more or less dissatisfied with the home, more or less dissatisfied with the neighborhood. We could assume that because in fact, Metro HRA is suburban, that safety was a factor. But I don't want to make assumptions, you know. I really want to know, what is it about the homes? What is it about the neighborhoods that was more or less attractive? Will you have the opportunity then in these interviews and in the focus groups that you'll be doing to ask those kinds of questions, get deeper into the information here? And also, will you have the opportunity to, in a participatory research mode, work with actually some of the residents to help design those questions and to ask those questions of other residents?
Madam Chair, thank you for those questions. And I hear two of those. I mean, one is definitely the interview and focus group methodology is going to be guided in part by the results from the survey. So for example, to explore more in depth some of these differences, the three key differences that we observed that you highlighted. And there's some other key areas, and sort of policy and program-driven questions as well that will help us constitute the focus groups and the interviews. So, we're interested in, for example, boomerang moves between the two service areas, or when residents who move to these so-called higher opportunity areas and then return back to the area that they moved from. That we think it's important to understand some of those additional elements of looking at how people who experience the programs differently or approach the programs differently, how their experiences differ as a result. I very much appreciate the question about participatory research. As you know, we have designed participatory research, a process that we've used quite a bit with our Young Leaders collaboration, and also most recently with climate conversations. That was not anticipated for this project, but it doesn't mean that we can't talk about it. There is a trade-off between the deep validity that you get with participant action research always, and the amount of time and expense, the delay in getting recommendations back. And so we're always navigating that piece, to be honest. But it's great to hear your kind of support for that idea.
I certainly support that and appreciate the trade-off. Given the time, the value of time, it's important that we're able to get this information back in a timely method so that we can use it to move forward, as council members have said, to understand what can be different and how, in fact, we can create an improved experience. I also think it's extremely important, since we are valuing the resident experience, to place as much emphasis as we possibly can on gaining that or informing the process with resident ideas. So if it cannot be fully participatory, I understand that. I would just certainly encourage that, to the extent we are able to engage with residents in the preparation of the questions for the interviews or the focus group, that we do that, and perhaps in the focus group, to be able to actually find a way to have those resident-led. My piece, that is not going to be from the entire council, and I might note that, but thank you for hearing me out on that. Are there additional questions or comments for our presenters? Yes, go ahead, Terry.
Madam Chair, I'd just like to publicly thank our research partners. I say this often, but housing authorities here in the state and around the country don't have this skill set at their organization to be able to do these types of things. So it's exciting that we have these smart researchers that work for the council that can help us collaborate on important projects like this to help us serve people better. And so thanks to Zhu and Matt and Darcy and Baresh, who is also a big part of this project in the beginning. So just publicly, thank you.
Thank you for jumping in with that. Are there other comments to finish? So I want to reiterate the thanks. It has been fully informative for all of us. We appreciate the work that you're doing and look forward to hearing from you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
There is no further business on our agenda. It is 5:30, and I think we have accomplished releasing staff and council members for the balance of this day. Thank you for your work here with us. And we are, unless there's other business, we are adjourned. Thank you.
A wrap.